Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. Okay, so for this video, I'm going to be doing my March wrap-up, all of the books that I managed to finish in the month of March. I didn't finish too many books in the month of March. I have 9 books to talk about. And while I did stick a little bit to my TBR, I did manage to fit in a little bit of mood reading. And the books that I mood read, is that a thing? Mood read? I don't know. But the other books that I managed to read that weren't on my TBR, I did quite enjoy. And I didn't really read any bad books this month, so that's always a plus. But anyway, enough of my rambling nonsense. Let's just go ahead and jump right into it. So before I get to the actual novels that I read this month, let's go ahead and start out with Skeleton Crew, which we're still reading for the Stephen King Short Story Book Club. We started back in March last month. We started with The Mist. Everyone really seemed to enjoy that, and now we're getting into some more of his actual short stories because The Mist is more of a novella. And I think we've read, at this point, like 5 or 6 of his short stories. I'll list them out here. We've been having a good time discussing them. Some of them have not been a lot of people's favorites, which is also just fun to get people's reactions from. But we actually just read The Jaunt, and I'm pretty sure most everyone who read this ended up loving it, or at least really enjoying it. It's definitely one of my favorite Stephen King short stories overall. It's definitely one of the best in the collections, and I'm definitely excited to continue in the month of April and May, and then I think we wrap this up in June, I'm pretty sure. So we're still trucking along with Skeleton Crew. So let's go ahead and start out with my least favorite books of the month and work my way up to the favorite books that I read this month. And probably my least favorite book of the month that I read in March is The Golden Couple by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Buchanan. Now, this is a thriller book that I got for Book of the Month, and it was decent. No, I'll explain myself a little bit more. It was a pretty good thriller. It had a really cool premise of like this therapist who lost her license because she kind of was doing things she wasn't supposed to. So she lost her license, but people still come to her because of this innovative like 10-step, 10 therapy session therapy thing that she's doing. Probably didn't explain that very well. But you're following this golden couple who everyone seems to think they're like the best couple, but the woman has cheated on her husband and they're trying to work out their marital problems. But of course, with a thriller, you know that there's going to be more explorations of stuff and crazy things start happening and crazy things start popping up and you're just like, oh, okay, well, this is pretty intriguing. But for me, like the first half of this book was much better than the second half, especially after figuring out the reveal, which pretty early on I was able to guess like what, not exactly what was going on, but who was behind everything. And so it was fairly predictable, but it was still enjoyable. I think I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. Like it was good in the moment, like it was decent, but it's not something that's like an all-time favorite, or it's not something that I would ever go back and reread. So definitely this is a book I will be unhauling. It was a good time, but it wasn't perfect and it wasn't anything special. The next book I have to talk about is The Running Man by Stephen King, aka Richard Bachman. And I also talked about this in a recent live show that I did with Josephina from Feeney Reads. We did a live show talking about The Long Walk, Road Work, and The Running Man. And definitely this was my least favorite of the 3 so far. I remember the first time I read this, because, you know, it's a reread for me, obviously. The first time I had a much better time. It was more fun, because of the fast pace, and it was just different than what King usually writes. But this time around, I definitely paid more attention to just how depressing the people's lives are in this book, and like their horrible living conditions, and the fact that they have to do all this crazy shit for money because they're so poor. That really was just a big bummer. This book was just a huge bummer. But it's still a good read. I would probably give it around 3.5 stars. Like I said, very quick. I read this in a day, essentially. And it just goes by super quick. You don't really want to put it down when you're reading it. And it's also just written very unusually by King standards. It's very short. It's like 400 pages. But it also has like 100 chapters. So it's just go, go, go. And not a lot of character development, not a lot of character analysis like you get with a lot of Stephen King books. So it's very different than a normal King book. Not bad per se, but it's definitely not one of my favorites. I think when I did my overall ranking for all of Stephen King books, I put this fairly high. I'm pretty sure I would put it lower now. But I still had a good time with it. I'd give it around 3.5 stars. The next book I have to talk about is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. And I gave this book 4 stars. I know a lot of people absolutely love this book. They give it either 4.5 or even 5 stars. While I did enjoy the book when it got going, I really struggled with it at the beginning. And I'll be honest, if I just picked this book up not knowing anything about it or not knowing that it has a rough start, I would have DNF'd this book. Because the first 4 chapters are so tedious and so boring, and it just hits you over the head with just like random, like just world building information that I don't care about, and it's just so much exposition that it just is boring. But you do get to a point where it starts to get interesting, and then something happens towards the middle of the book where you're like, oh, I guess that's where the direction is going. And then the second half of this book is much better, in my opinion. It's very cathartic, like a lot of people say. It's definitely worth reading, even though it is a rough start. And really the ending, like basically the last chapter I kind of just skimmed through because I've been told that it's not really that important, and it has to do with like her other series that's like not very popular and that no one really cares about. But yeah, overall I am glad that I liked this book. Well, no, I'm glad that I read the book. Well, I am glad that I liked it. But yeah, I did enjoy it. Not perfect by any means. I would never give this book 5 stars just because the very beginning and the very ending is not that great. But it is worth it because the middle chunk of this book and towards the end of the book, very cathartic, very moving. I had a great time with this book overall. So 4 stars. The next book I have to talk about is The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon by Stephen King. And this was actually the winner for my Patreon wheel spin that I'm doing for my patrons. I still can't get that right. And the winner was Stacy, my girlfriend. She picked this book out, and that's what was spun for the wheel. And so I have a book review for this, and I'll link it down below that I've already done. And so I won't go into too much detail because I've already done a review for it. But overall, I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I liked it much better the second time because this was actually the very first King book that I read. I read it way back in middle school when I was like 12 or 13, and I didn't really appreciate it like I did as an adult. Definitely reading this book as an adult, I definitely appreciated how King was able to write such a convincing and believable kid character, and I was more interested in that, and it was definitely more terrifying because when you read about a kid getting lost in the woods, like when you're a kid, you don't realize what exactly like the parents might be going through or like what an adult would feel. And just like, yeah, King really taps into that well. And yeah, like I said, I go more into depth in my book review, and I'll leave that down below. But overall, I had a very good time with this book. I gave it 4 stars. Probably my least favorite parts of the book are all the baseball stuff, because I'm not a huge baseball fan, and obviously Stephen King is a big baseball fan, and he definitely weaves in a lot of baseball into this book. Probably my least favorite part, but overall, still a great book, and I recommend it to King fans who haven't given it a shot yet. So, yep, 4 stars from me. The next book I have to talk about is a book that I actually don't own myself. I don't own a physical copy. I don't own an audiobook. This was actually read to me by my girlfriend Stacy, and that would be Beatride by Emily Henry. We've been reading books to each other the last few months, and she was in the mood to read me a romance. And I was initially hesitant because, romance isn't one of my favorite genres. But after her telling me the premise of this book, I was actually initially intrigued. This book is essentially about 2 rivals, one named January, who is more of a romance writer, and another person named Augustus, who is more of a literary writer. So they were rivals back in college, back in their writing classes, and obviously they've gone on to different career paths, one of them being a romance writer, and one of them being a literary writer, and they actually end up being neighbors at these beach houses, and they start talking, and they start to develop this contest where January has to write a literary novel and Augustus has to write a romance novel. And you get some clashing in there. It's overall just a very cute story, and I really liked the premise. And I'll be honest, I really just enjoyed Stacy reading this book to me. That was my main enjoyment of it. If I was just reading this on my own, I might have enjoyed it, but definitely having her read it to me was a blast. I will say though, while this book was fun to read and have read to me, it wasn't perfect. I think we both actually felt the same way about it, me and Stacy. The first half was much better than the second half. The second half sort of has this stupid miscommunication trope, which is apparently a very common thing in romance novels. That part wasn't very good, and then the overall ending was kind of meh. It was fine. But definitely the first half was very fun. And just overall, it was a very fun and cute story. Yeah, I guess for romance novels, it has to have like an interesting premise. And also just the character of January was also just a fun character. She had a bit of personality to her, a bit of humor, and that's always good. So yeah, I need a good premise and a good character. Augustus wasn't really that interesting. He was fine, but yeah, so overall, it was just a fun experience having the story read to me, and now I'm actually reading her a story. It's called You Love Me by Caroline Kepnes, which is the 3rd book in the Joel Goldberg series. Not really like a romance book. It's more of like a horror book, but it's still fun to read. So yeah, it's really fun reading each other's stories, and yeah. Okay, and finally I have 4 books they're all rereads for me. They're all 5 stars, and I don't have too much to say about them, but I will say what they are. So one of them is another Stephen King book, another Dark Tower book, and that would of course be book 3, The Wastelands. This is probably my second favorite Dark Tower book. It's either that or Wizard and Glass. I'm still not sure. I'll have to wait until I read Wizard and Glass this month in April. But overall, again, 5-star book, terrific book. I like it slightly less than book 2, Drawing of the Three, but still, this is where the story really gets going, where the plot gets going, and basically this book is pretty much nonstop. And it's 600 pages, but it's very well paced, especially for a Stephen King book. And yeah, I just had a blast reading this. I can't wait to jump right into Wizard and Glass sometime in April. And yeah, I love this book. I love this series. Not too much to say about it though. And then probably my favorite books that I read in the month of March is a reread for me, and it's my favorite trilogy of all time, if believe it or not, and that would be the Themis Files by Sylvain Neville. First book being Sleeping Giants, second book being Waking Gods, and the third book being Only Human. Yeah, all these books are 5 stars, and I have them all on Audible because the books are narrated by a full cast of characters. Very immersive experience, and it's incredible. Not only is it my favorite, these are my favorite sci-fi books, but it's just my favorite trilogy. Like, yeah, so I don't have too much to say about it other than that I love it, and if I don't want to go too long because it would just be me gushing about it, I really don't have any complaints. I just really love the story, and it goes by super quick because, you know, it's like 300-page books, so it's definitely a series I could see myself like rereading once a year just because of how quick and easy they are to get through. And yeah, I love the characters. I love the story. I love, you know, the first time I read it, it was just so unpredictable, the directions it went in. And I know people don't love the third book, Only Human, but it has one of my favorite sci-fi tropes, which I can't really get into because of spoilers, but I love when we explore like that topic in sci-fi, and we get a lot of that in this book. So I love the series. I love the Themis Files. If you haven't checked it out yet, I highly recommend it. And yeah, those are my favorite books that I read this month. All 5-star reads for me. Yes. All right, those are all of the books that I managed to read in the month of March. Please let me know if you've read any of these books and let me know what you thought about them down in the comments below. Whether you loved them, whether you hated them, whether you thought they were kind of meh, just a little meh. Either way, I want to know down below. Also, I want to know what your favorite books you read in the month of March were. Please let me know all of that down in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and the Bookish Drummer Discord. And if you'd like to further support me, go check out my Patreon page and see what that's all about. But anyway, thank you so much for watching and have a terrific day.